afternoon and welcome to St. Charles at Home. And I'm delighted to welcome Beth to be with us today. And Beth, why don't you share a little bit about your own life and the experience here at St. Charles?
Thanks, Msgr. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I've been a parishioner at St. Charles since 2002 with my family. My husband and I have moved here then. We've since had two boys, raised them at St. Charles. They've been through all the sacraments there. And I was also a catechist for a while, and I'm a lector. And as you will hear in our conversation, I'm a member of the loose faith sharing group on Sunday mornings. So it was interesting to hear your homily after we had our discussion. So,
were we in sync with one another, or?
Well, yeah. The great thing, it was interesting because we were sort of looking at that the contrast between the first reading and the gospel. As you pointed out in your homily, the first reading was a little more stark, a little more like. A little more, punitive, I guess, even though they were covering sort of a similar topic. And the discussion in our group ranged from sort of really broad in that first reading of like, if you, considering the social backdrop of things happening now, like if you don't do anything when you see wrongdoing, you're at fault. This wasn't so much a personal thing as like a sort of the broader things happening out there and how it's easy maybe sometimes not to say anything, but that we have a responsibility to. But on the more personal level, there was some discussion about, who am I to go tell somebody like you're doing wrong, like go to the person and tell them they're doing wrong. And one of our members was saying, you needed like a middle step there where you check yourself or you go to someone and say, should I be going to this person or not? And then we hadn't really focused on the second reading until the end of our session because we were kind of just playing off the first and the gospel. But in your homily, it was perfect because you highlight how usually the second reading doesn't necessarily have to do with the other two. But in this case, it served as a really good bridge between the first and the third. Mm-hmm. And I felt it gave me I had a more personal, a deeper understanding from listening to what you were saying about moving from sort of keeping people out or, following the rules to this idea of reconciliation and how Paul lived it, as sort of the guy who was, laying down the law, mm-hmm. and this conversion. And now in the second reading was saying, all the laws can be boiled down to love your neighbor as yourself. And my final thought, which I would like to ask more to you about this, is you brought up the idea of freedom and how this conversion of St. Paul gave him a freedom. And I wouldn't say I struggle with it, but I just thought that was a really interesting word choice and just wanted to hear more about what you mean by that.
Well, Paul discovers really freedom in the truest sense of the word. It's a process. It doesn't happen. We have that image of he gets thrown off the horse and the world is turned 180 degrees around. Well, it doesn't actually happen that way. It's a process, and part of that process is that Paul spends 3 years in the desert. And he spends those 3 years in the desert. I would make the assumption he spends those 3 years trying to process what occurred in his life and what's the significance of it. And I think what he came to understand is that Jesus had brought about a new creation, and that gave him freedom. He wasn't restricted by his Jewish background. He wasn't restricted by Jewish law or Jewish custom. He could do the unthinkable. When you think of it, remember how the tension that existed between a person of the Jewish community and a person of the Gentile community. I mean, there was ostracization in the sense of you did not associate, you did not speak, you did not have any relation whatsoever. And you would not welcome, as a Jewish person, you would not welcome that Gentile into your community. And yet Paul finds the freedom to, in a sense, go beyond and becomes the apostle to the Gentiles. And most of his writing, as you read it, most of the writing is to the Gentile community, where he has founded church. He's founded communities of faith. And that, in a sense, is a manifestation of his freedom. He was free of the constraints that held him back and opened him up to basically finding or discovering or encountering God's new moment and embracing it, and then going forth proclaiming it. And so it's a different concept of freedom than the concept we have today. The concept we have of freedom today is you can do whatever you want, whenever you want, wherever you want, however you want. That's not freedom.
Right.
The freedom that Paul discovers is the freedom of a child of God, and the freedom then to embrace the will of God and to walk by the path of God. And that's the freedom that I think we are desperately lacking in today's world, all of us, because we're so constrained by our cultures, by our training, and that applies to the church also. I mean, you see the struggles that, again, Pope Francis has as he tries to take a step beyond the boundary.
Yeah.
And how quickly, the criticism comes and everything else comes, and basically the people in the Vatican telling it, no, you can't do that. That's not the way things operate. And so again, that it's going to be very interesting. They've announced that he's written another encyclical.
Oh.
And he's going to make it public on the feast of St. Francis. He's going up to Assisi, and he'll have mass at the tomb of Francis, and then he'll sign the document, and it will be released. But it's about the brotherhood of humankind. So it's going to be fascinating to see what he has in that. I would tend to think that it probably will be along the lines of John the 23rd's Pacem in Terris, along those lines. But we'll see.
On that note of brotherhood, I thought that just that whole line of thinking of the freedom that you gain and this being about reconciliation and relationship more than following rules and, raising, we did discuss some being kind of Catholic growing up with the rules and you on first reading, you might be like, you want to single out people and be like, hey, but it's not like that. It's more like you love someone enough that you're in relationship with people and you're trying to reconcile so that you can become a better church. You and hopefully people will come to you too. I mean, it grew, my understanding grew a little, that the idea of the theme of the church being a constant, in the constant state of reconciliation.
It's the main ministry of the church. And it goes back to, matter of fact, I thought after, I was reflecting on the Mass later in the day, and I thought, wait a minute now, he's saying that if they don't listen the third time to the church, then treat them like you would a Gentile or a tax collector. I said, wait a minute, if that's what he's saying, look at how he treated the Gentile and the tax collector.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't isolate them or throw. He basically was willing to, in a sense, engage and not force them to do what they were uncomfortable with, but basically woo them to be willing to be open to at least giving him a hearing. I mean, you think of, the tax collector Zacchaeus going up in the tree, and and how Jesus calls him down, and again, the stories are written always in such a way that everything happens within seconds. But the reality is that it probably took a lot more time, for that whole situation to grow, in the sense of, calling Zacchaeus down, going with Zacchaeus to his home. And maybe it was after the visit and the interaction, the encounter, that Zacchaeus really came around and said, wait a minute, yeah, okay, I'll make up, with all these people, and give half of my thing, restore everything. But it had to do more with that encounter. And it's like Paul, the encounter that Paul had with Jesus was an encounter in love, an uncompromising love that embraced him. And that's why I think that image of the light, that he's blinded by the light, is so critical. Because again, we tend to think in very literal sense. They didn't think that way. They were more, how could I put it? They were more visual. Imagery had a lot to say to them. And when they wrote with imagery. They created pictures. And so the scene is as important as the words. And sometimes the only way you'll understand the words is to understand the environment in which the words are spoken. And that's the descriptive part of what they present.
But even the words of, Paul, why are you persecuting me?
Yeah.
Just that sense of like the shock of like kind of got it wrong, but a loving way.
Again, very, very personal. I mean, Jesus,
very personal.
Very personal with him, and that kind of jolts him, But it doesn't, in a sense, he doesn't condemn him. He doesn't, harm him in any way, But he leads him forward, and that's the other thing that I think we often forget, is that it's a journey. And it's an ongoing journey of opening both our hearts and minds, not that we open, but that the Lord opens our hearts and minds to be able to really understand what is the design of God for us.
I think that that insight about it really turns it on its head when you interpret that sense of like treat them like a tax collector or a Gentile from Jesus's perspective and heart. That it's not saying condemn them. It's saying, give them space, give them time. Don't give them the word, and then it's kind of up to them. But don't. It doesn't mean shut the door. No. I mean, I think that's what your main point was. This is not about closing doors. It's about opening. It's about relationship. And I found that to be kind of the bridge for us where, you know, when I talk to my little group next week, I'll mention it or tell them to watch this, because it was what we needed. It was like that extra thing that we needed in our discussion. And I think it really helps to put things, helps it all sort of come together, and making it understanding in a way that's very powerful.
Oh, I think it opens up, how can I put it? It opens up the door for the real future. For if we're ever going to find peace, it's going to come only through that process. So that rather than labeling and naming and all the nonsense that's going on right now, that's not going to bring us any closer to a better world. If anything, it's going to put us in the other direction. But if we were to take the approach of the Lord, maybe we could take some steps in the right direction.
And I do think that looking at that through the prism of the second reading, saying love your neighbor as yourself, helps you to not have that. Because when I was reading the gospel without that, it's just what you're saying. There's people on both sides thinking they know.
Mm-hmm.
Someone's like, no, you're doing it wrong, or you're doing it wrong. And it seems to be a big problem. You know, it's a problem now. We have people that just can't bridge a divide. But if you approach it from the perspective of how you would want to be treated, I think that changes the whole game. And it maybe can bring about a sense of, because you don't want people to think, oh, well, in Matthew's gospel, they told me that I can go correct somebody. It's not quite done that. You have to do it through the prism of love and of how you would want to be approached. And I think that changes, it changes it. It allows for two opposite sides to come together, I hope.
Well, because what it does is it asks you to approach the other person not in a sense of I'm going to correct you, or basically I'm going to tell you what's wrong with your life, but it basically says I approach you out of love, and let's together journey the next step. And that means that basically both are going to have to engage in some corrective behavior.
Right.
Never just one side.
One other thing that another insight that I had from listening to a daily sort of podcast that I was listening to, that sort of took the end of the gospel, about, wherever there's two or three, I am there. Mm-hmm. And it was suggesting that, it was interesting. It was just suggesting, like, when you're in a group situation, like, would it hurt to say, come Lord Jesus, in that setting? And this isn't in a sense of where you're trying to reconcile with someone, but where you're inviting Christ in any kind of situation. And as a working person, I don't know if I would ever do that in a meeting. I don't work for a religious organization, but in my mind, I'm like, maybe I would, before getting on this meeting, say to myself, come Lord Jesus, like, invite him into the daily workings more of when there are groups together, whether or not we're all praying together or not,
I think that's very real, in the sense of what it does is it encourages us to recognize the presence of the Lord with us. We're never the rugged individual. We're always part of a community of others. And the one who is the center of that community of others, the one who creates the community of others, is the Lord Jesus. And that's, having that awareness, again, opens up tremendous doors in how we build and carry out the relationships we have one with another. And it certainly is a great challenge, because we live in a society that kind of idolizes the rugged individual.
Yeah.
And it's probably one of the greatest, I'm amazed in the sense of the COVID-19 experience, and how it's almost God's way of teaching us that you need each other.
Yeah.
No one of you is a rugged individual. You need each other. You're dependent. And in a sense, you're dependent on the least among you in order to survive through this experience.
Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully people are coming to grips with that, and that it will, in a sense, it will open the door to a more caring community, because people will see the interconnectedness. I mean, if you went to, my experience, you went to going to the hospital with the COVID-19, if, the nurses, the doctors, and they were from all over. I mean, they were,
Yeah.
And the aides and everybody else, if they weren't there, how would you have made it?
Yeah. Any from the people that are cleaning the hospital, just, every aspect.
Yeah, that's what I mean. You wouldn't have, no one would have survived, if it were not for the willingness of others, whether, again, oftentimes because it was their job. But the point is that they were willing to put themselves at risk in order to provide service.
Yes. I think another aspect of this time that we're in now, similarly in terms of relationship, is that it's happening to all of us.
Right.
It's all like you're sitting in the rectory, I'm sitting in my home, and I work in journalism, and we were talking today. Like typically the stories we would be writing about would be about something else, not us,
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of, instead we're writing, if we're writing about people that are working from home and whether they should go back to the office, that's us too. If you're talking about, parents with their kids and childcare, that's us too. If you're talking about, I don't know, health, everything is connected, and connections we make, I make on a daily basis with people in and outside of the workplaces. It's a lot. You can get up to the meaty parts a lot quicker. You get to a different level than maybe you would have in the pre-COVID days, which can be good because you see that there's a rawness to us knowing that we're all going through this, and it strips away sort of this layer of who you were, or what you were, and makes us all a little more kind of the heart of what we all are. It's people trying to make it.
No, I think, again, as with most things, COVID-19 was a curse on one side and a blessing on the other. And you just hope that, again, we learn from it. But learning is tough. It doesn't happen. I mean, you look at our history and the many opportunities we've had to learn and, in a sense, to change, and how infrequently we've learned and how little we've changed.
That's true. Yeah. That's why I'm glad that I was able to discuss this reading today, because it would be one that, honestly, it would be not like, it seems all about rules and, I like other ones better, and I really appreciate that I had a chance to really think about this one more, because it really does get to the core of things, and relationship and reconciliation. It's just really, and this freedom idea, just like those three things, I've been thinking about them a lot today. And I do think there's room for, it's opening the door to relationship that I just think is very important for us right now. And it makes these readings you know, not just something to skip over till next week or whatever the next week is, but, you know, really think about, because it's real tools that we can use to really reach out to another person. And I just find it gives me hope, you know, it makes me feel, it makes you feel like the church is alive, you know?
Well, I think that was certainly what was intended by the scripture, is to make us understand that the church lives, and the church lives because Jesus lives, you know, and in a sense, when you look at the dynamism that's there, it's a dynamism beyond our comprehension or understanding. The fact that we have been drawn into the life of God, you know, and that's the freedom. There's nothing that can happen to us on this earth that will ever take us away from being alive in God. And that's what keeps us going.
I think it's a great message for now. And it's also a great message if you're the one that's being confronted, or I don't know if I want to say confronted, but, or just, you know, approached, that it's done out of love and out of a sense of like, let's try to find a common ground. Let's try to all move together. And as you say, both sides end up having to correct often, or, you know,
Oh yeah.
It's not easy, but it just gives you it's just a very hopeful, powerful message, because it also says that it's in our power to do something. Like, we can make a difference, you know. It's not just about following rules, or, you know, I saw you didn't, you know, you didn't stand when you're supposed to stand, or whatever. It's deeper, you know.
Oh no, and it's
a lot of Catholics who like to, you know, there's certain rules.
Oh yeah, no, we are so conditioned in one sense, so that, you know, and people come up to me. I mean, it's part of, you know, well, you know, so and so didn't stand. And I say, well, yeah, what? You know, what's the big deal? I understand. Maybe they had a pain, maybe something else. I don't know what was it. I didn't go over and ask them, you know. And if you go to other parts of the world, they don't kneel, they stand.
Right.
So I mean, you know, it's the customs that people come with. It's their life experience in many cases of what they came out of. And so, but it's amazing the things that we get excited about, and are willing to kind of, oh, pick on that. Who is it? I was seeing something, it was on the internet just the other day. And it was about, they were complaining that Pope Francis doesn't kneel at certain parts of the Mass. And I said, gee, I hope they don't watch me, because I don't kneel either, because my legs, I can't do that anymore. And I'm sure he's in the same situation. You know? But
on the note of Pope Francis too, I mean, his famous quote, "Who am I to judge?" Mm-hmm. Which doesn't mean that it was very much the sense of like, he wasn't necessarily condoning certain things, but he was not judging, and he was trying to meet, you know, it's a sense of meeting people where they are, and not laying, actually the opposite of laying down the law, but knowing that there is, you know, there's understanding that can lead to something for both sides. It's not shutting the door, you know?
No, it's opening the door and basically trying to encounter the other person where the other person is, not where I want the person to be, you know? So that in a sense, I grow and they grow through the encounter. And that's where, in a sense, you have the real reconciliation. You know? But great. Well, it's been great talking with you.
You too, and thank you for adding that layer with your homily. It was, like I say, it's given me a lot to think about, and I hope that anybody listening feels the same way, and I appreciate your insights. And yeah, it was great.
Good, very good. Well, you take care. The boys are doing well?
They're doing well. Everybody's healthy. We're all good, so all good.
I miss them serving.
Yeah, I know. I wish we could get back to where we were all, everybody was up on the altar, but
Yeah. But it'll happen. It'll happen.
yeah.
Very good. Well, thank you, Beth. Good being with you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.